Darius Webb was 41 years old, and until that Saturday afternoon, he believed the life he'd built was solid. 12 years as a Navy SEAL, 2 combat deployments, a Bronze Star in a shoebox, a marriage he had poured everything into. He was in his own backyard, building a pergola his wife had mentioned wanting 2 years ago when the vehicles started pulling onto his street. He came around the side of the house, work gloves still on, and stopped. 20 men stood across his lawn in a deliberate circle, and at the bottom of his own porch steps stood Preston Hale, dressed sharp, arms spread wide, performing for an audience, with Camille watching from the passenger seat of his SUV. Preston looked at Darius the way men look at problems they believe they've already solved. "We came here to put you in your place," he said. What Preston Hale didn't know, what none of those 20 men knew, was exactly who was standing across from them. And what Darius Webb did next would cost them everything. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The wood was good wood. Darius Webb ran his thumb along the edge of the beam and felt the grain, smooth and tight. No warping, no soft spots. He'd spent an extra $40 at the lumber yard to get the quality stuff. Cedar. It would hold up against the weather, against the years. He didn't know how to do things any other way. The backyard was quiet except for the sound of his circular saw and the occasional call of a bird somewhere in the oak tree near the fence. Morning light came in low and golden over the rooftops, laying long shadows across the grass. The yard smelled like fresh-cut wood and damp earth. It was a good smell, the kind that meant something was getting built. He measured the next beam, marked it with a pencil, measured again. Then he cut. Once. The pergola was taking shape against the back fence. 4 main posts already set and level. Cross beams going up now. Camille had mentioned wanting one almost 2 years ago. She'd been scrolling through her phone one evening, shown him a picture, said, "Wouldn't that be nice?" He had said yes. He'd filed it away like he filed everything, quietly, completely, into the place in his mind where important things waited until it was time. That time was now. He was making it happen the way he made everything happen, without a speech about it, without a countdown. He just showed up one Saturday morning with the right tools and the right wood, and started building. That was Darius Webb. He was 6'2" and 215 pounds, most of it the kind of lean, dense muscle that doesn't come from a gym, but from years of carrying weight in hard places. His hands were large and calloused, the hands of a man who had never once in his adult life been afraid of work. His face was broad and dark-skinned, with a jaw that looked like it had been cut from the same good cedar he was working with, still, composed. The kind of face that didn't give much away. 12 years in the Navy had done that. 2 combat deployments in places he still didn't talk about at dinner tables. He'd come home from both of them walking upright, which was more than some men managed. The Bronze Star was in a shoebox at the top of the bedroom closet. He hadn't looked at it in 3 years. It wasn't a trophy. It was just a piece of metal the government gave him for a moment he had survived, and others hadn't. He didn't need to look at it to remember. He got out at 30, enrolled in school, earned his civil engineering degree in 3 years while working construction on weekends. Now, at 41, he managed structural projects for a firm downtown. Bridges, public buildings, foundations, things that had to hold, things that people's lives depended on. He checked his phone, 12:14 p.m. Camille had said she'd be home by 10. He had texted her at 10:30. A simple message, "You on your way?" 1 check mark, not delivered. He'd tried again at 11. Same. He set the phone face down on the top of his toolbox and picked up the next beam. He wasn't panicking. Darius Webb didn't panic. He cataloged. The way he cataloged everything. Quietly, completely. into that same place in his mind where important things waited. Data point. She is late. Data point. She is not responding. File it. Continue. He had been filing similar data points for the better part of a year. Camille had grown quieter. Not the comfortable quiet of two people who knew each other well enough to sit in the same room without performing. Something else. A pointed quiet. The kind that had edges. She had started spending more evenings out. Girls' nights, she said. Networking events. Dinners with colleagues from the real estate group she'd joined. He never pressed. He was not a man who pressed, but he noticed. He noticed the way she looked at him sometimes. Not with dislike, exactly. With something closer to impatience. Like he was a slow elevator she had been waiting on for too long. Like his steadiness, the very thing he'd always believed was his best offering, had somehow become the thing that annoyed her most. 7 years of marriage. No children. She always had reasons to wait on that. He had accepted each reason one at a time, the way he accepted most things, without drama, with full attention. He set the beam in place and drove the first screw. Darius, he turned. His neighbor, Gerald, was leaning over the back fence. Retired postal worker. Good man. A little too fond of knowing other people's business, but he meant no harm by it. Morning, Gerald. That's gonna look real nice, Gerald said, nodding at the pergola frame. Then something shifted in his face. A small hesitation. The look of a man deciding whether to say the next thing. Listen, Gerald said. I don't want to be in your business. Darius waited. But I've seen Camille's car. Downtown. Parked outside the Harlow Hotel. He paused. Twice this week. Darius set his drill down on the crossbeam. He didn't say anything for a moment. He looked at Gerald. Gerald looked back at him with the expression of a man who wished he hadn't said it, and knew he'd done the right thing by saying it anyway. Appreciate it, Darius said. Gerald nodded and walked back toward his house. Darius stood in the quiet yard, his hands at his sides, the pergola half-built behind him, and the morning light still coming in gold, and even across the grass. He heard them before he saw them, the low rumble of engines. More than one. The sound of doors opening and closing in a way that was too coordinated, too deliberate to be his neighbors coming home from the grocery store. Darius set down his drill. He pulled off his work gloves slowly, one finger at a time, and tucked them into the back pocket of his jeans. Then he walked around the side of the house toward the front yard. He stopped at the corner of the house and looked. There were trucks and SUVs lined up along both sides of his street. Big vehicles, some of them still running, exhaust curling up in the afternoon air. And men, 20 of them, maybe a few more, spread out across his front lawn and driveway. Some had their arms crossed. Some just stood there, hands loose at their sides. A few he recognized from the neighborhood. Most he didn't. They had arranged themselves in a loose circle. The shape of it was deliberate. Somebody had organized this. Somebody had made phone calls, given instructions, picked a time. At the bottom of his porch steps stood a man Darius had never met in person. But he knew the type immediately. Preston Hale was dressed like a man who wanted you to know he had money. Dark slacks, a fitted cream-colored shirt, collar open, a watch that caught the afternoon sun. He was broad-shouldered, well-built, the kind of handsome that came with enough confidence to fill a room. His arms were spread open wide, chin tilted up, a wide smile pulling at the corners of his mouth. He was performing. All of it. The men, the trucks, the stance. It was a performance. And Darius was supposed to be the audience. At the curb, Preston's black SUV sat idling. Through the windshield, half-shadowed, Darius could see Camille. She wasn't getting out. She was watching. Still. Waiting. He looked at her for exactly 1 second. Then he looked back at Preston. "We came here to put you in your place," Preston said. His voice was loud and easy, the voice of a man used to being the loudest person in a room. "So we're going to settle this today." A few of the men shifted. Someone laughed under their breath. Others just watched. Darius stood at the edge of his own lawn and said nothing. He pulled one work glove from his back pocket, removed the other, set them both on the porch rail beside him. Then he rolled his left sleeve to the elbow, rolled his right sleeve to the elbow. His movements were unhurried, completely calm. His eyes moved across the circle. This was something he had done in the dark, in foreign cities, in tight corridors where every shadow was a variable. His brain ran the numbers without him asking it to. He didn't see 20 men. He saw a geometry problem. He saw distances, angles, weight distribution. He saw the 3 men up front who were leaning in, ready. They were the ones with something to prove. He saw the 4 on the right side, whose body language had already gone loose and uncertain. They hadn't fully understood what they were walking into. He saw the men near the trucks who were close enough to the exit that their feet were already pointed toward it. 20 men sounded like a lot. It wasn't. Not to him. He stepped off the porch onto the front walkway. The circle tightened, and then the first man made his decision. He was big, wide through the shoulders, neck like a tree stump, and he stepped forward out of the circle and put his hand on Darius's chest. A shove. Not a full one. The kind meant to test, to humiliate, to get a reaction for the audience watching. He got a reaction. Darius's right hand came up and controlled the man's wrist before the shove even finished. He turned the arm, redirected the body, and the man went down face first into the grass so fast he didn't have time to be surprised about it. He was still registering what happened when Darius was already moving. The second man came from the left, hard and fast, committed. He caught an elbow across the jaw that pivoted him sideways and sat him down like his knees had just forgotten their purpose. 2 more rushed together. The kind of move that works on someone who hasn't spent years training for exactly this. Darius stepped into one, used the man's momentum to steer him directly into the other, and both of them went down in a tangle of arms and confusion. A fifth threw a wide punch. Darius wasn't there anymore. He'd moved a half step to the outside, let the punch go past, and put the man's face into the hood of a parked truck with a flat, quiet efficiency that made a sound like a book dropping on a table. 6, 7. An eighth came from behind and found nothing but air and then the ground. It wasn't fast. It wasn't slow. It was precise, like driving a screw into the right spot with the right bit. No wasted motion. No heat in it. By the time the 8th man was on the ground, the circle wasn't a circle anymore. It was a crowd of men standing back, some holding their wrists, one sitting on the curb with his head down, several already walking quietly back to their vehicles, not saying a word, not looking at anyone. The performance was over. The audience was leaving. Darius turned. He looked at Preston Hale. Preston had not moved from the bottom of the porch steps, but his arms were no longer open. They hung at his sides. The wide smile was gone. His chin was no longer tilted up. Darius looked at him for a long moment. The same steady, measuring look he'd used on the rest of them. Just data. Just variables. Just another thing to be noted and filed. Then he turned, walked up the 3 porch steps, opened his front door, and closed it behind him. The front door closed behind him, and the house went quiet. Darius stood in the entryway for a moment, listened. The sound of engines outside, doors closing, men leaving, the neighborhood going back to whatever it had been 2 hours ago. He walked to the kitchen and sat down at the table. His hands rested flat on the wood in front of him. The knuckles on his right hand were reddened, not torn, not swollen, just the dull pink of skin that had done work. He looked at them the way he looked at everything, without drama. He wasn't shaking, wasn't breathing hard. The physical part of what happened was already sorted and filed. His body had done what his body knew how to do, and it was done. What wasn't done was everything else. He sat still for a full minute, not thinking, just letting the shape of things settle. Then he saw the tablet. It was sitting on the kitchen counter next to the coffee maker, right where it always sat. The screen was still on. Camille had left in a hurry this morning. He'd heard her moving fast through the bedroom, the bathroom, the front door, and she'd left it open. He crossed the kitchen and picked it up. Her messaging app was on the screen, a thread near the top. The name read P. He opened it. He read it standing up. Didn't sit down, didn't need to. The thread went back 14 months. He scrolled slowly, reading without rushing, the way he read structural reports and site assessments, looking for the load-bearing pieces, the things that would tell him where the whole thing was likely to fail. The early messages were careful, coded, the kind of language two people use when they're still pretending there's something to hide. But as the months went on, the caution fell away. By month 3, they weren't hiding anything from each other anymore, just from him. There were messages about hotels, about weekends she had told Darius were work trips, about Preston's plans, Preston's properties, Preston's vision for what their life was going to look like. The way she wrote about it made something cold settle in Darius's chest. Not grief, not yet, but the particular feeling of a man who has just understood fully how long he has been lied to. He kept scrolling. Near the bottom of the thread, the messages shifted. More specific, more operational. He's going to be home all day Saturday. You need to do it then. I already talked to everybody. They're in. He won't know what hit him. And then the last message, sent at 8:47 that morning, before the trucks pulled up, before the circle formed on his lawn. It's done. He won't cause problems after today. Darius read it twice, set the tablet down on the counter, picked up his phone. He photographed every screen, every message, scrolled back to the beginning and photographed each one, moving slowly, making sure each image was clear and complete. He did it without feeling. There would be time for feeling later. Right now, there was only the work. When he was done, he put the phone in his pocket and went to the hallway. The filing cabinet was in the small office they never really used. Camille called it the study, which had always struck Darius as a generous name for a room with a desk and some boxes in it. He opened the top drawer. Mortgage papers, utility accounts, the folder he kept for tax returns going back 7 years. He pulled them out and set them on the desk, photographing each one methodically, front and back. He opened the second drawer. Bank statements, joint account records going back 2 years. He pulled them out and set them in a neat stack. Underneath the statements, tucked inside a plain manila envelope that he had never seen before, was a small packet of documents held together with a binder clip. He took them out. Articles of incorporation, state filing receipt, registered agent paperwork. The business name at the top of the first page was Webb Hale Properties, LLC. He stood there in the quiet of the study and read through the filing date, 18 months ago. Camille's name was on it. Preston's name was on it. His name was not on it anywhere. He photographed every page, clipped the documents back together exactly as he'd found them, placed everything back into the filing cabinet in the same order, the same way, undisturbed. Then he walked back to the kitchen and stood at the counter. His phone was in his hand. He found the contact and pressed call. It rang twice. "Darius!" Her voice was the same as it always was, steady, a little raspy in the way it had always been. The voice of a woman who had seen enough of life to know how to sound calm inside of it. "Auntie," he said, "I need you to look at some documents. Can you come tonight?" A pause. Not long. Rosalie didn't need long. "I'll bring my glasses," she said. "Give me an hour." He thanked her, hung up, scrolled to the next contact. Victor. He pressed call. Victor picked up on the second ring. No greeting. Just, "Talk to me." Darius told him. All of it. The trucks, the circle, the men. Preston standing at the bottom of his steps, like he'd already won something. He said it the way he would have reported a situation to a commanding officer. Straight, sequential, without editorializing. When he got to the part about the tablet, he heard Victor go quiet on the other end. Not uncomfortable quiet, thinking quiet. "I'm coming over," Victor said. "Rosalie's already on her way. Then I'll be there before she finishes her first sentence." He hung up. Rosalie arrived 53 minutes later. She knocked twice, pushed the door open without waiting. She had never once waited to be let in, not in 40 years, and walked straight into the kitchen with her reading glasses already in hand. She was a small woman, short and compact, with close-cropped gray hair, and the kind of face that had stopped performing patience somewhere around the age of 50. She set her purse on the counter, looked at Darius standing by the table, and looked at his hands. She didn't say anything about his knuckles. She didn't say anything at all for a moment. Then, "Show me." He spread everything across the table. The photographed documents on his phone scrolled through slowly so she could read each one. The printed copies he'd made on the office printer before she arrived. Mortgage records, account statements, the LLC filing. He laid them out flat, in order, the way you lay out a blueprint. Rosalie put her glasses on and bent over the table. She read the way she always read documents, without rushing, without reacting, her lips pressed together and her eyes moving line by line. She'd spent 31 years in a paralegal office, watching people's lives get taken apart on paper. She knew what she was looking at before she finished the first page. Victor showed up 18 minutes later. He came through the front door with the low, easy movement of a big man who had spent years learning not to take up more space than a situation required. He was 6'2", broad through the shoulders, with a close-cut beard going gray at the jaw. He nodded at Darius, nodded at Rosalie, pulled out a chair, and sat down without a word. Rosalie didn't look up. "Webb Hale Properties," she said, still reading. "That's what they called it." She said it the way someone says a thing when the saying of it is the whole point. Darius sat across from her. "Filed 18 months ago. I can see that." She turned the page. Camille signed as managing member. Hale signed as co-member. The registered agent is a law office on the east side. She tapped the page with one finger. This was not put together overnight. Somebody paid for this. Victor leaned forward with his elbows on the table. "The bank statements. What's the transfer pattern?" "That's what I'm looking at now." Rosalie pulled the account statements closer. She was quiet for a minute. Then, home improvement. That's what she coded them as. She looked up at Darius over the top of her glasses. "Baby, she's been pulling money out of your joint savings for at least 18 months and booking it as home improvement expenses." Darius nodded once. He had suspected it. Hearing it said out loud was something different. He let the something different pass through him and kept his face still. "How much?" Victor asked. Rosalie flipped back 2 pages. "From what I can see here, somewhere north of $40,000, maybe more. A forensic accountant could trace it properly." Victor straightened. "Paul Reeves." Darius looked at him. "I've used him in 3 cases," Victor said. "Matrimonial asset concealment twice. Business fraud once. He's thorough and he's quiet. He can pull the full trace. Where the money went, how it was moved, what the LLC received. All of it documented and clean enough to put in front of a judge. Get him on the phone first thing tomorrow," Darius said. Victor nodded. "Already my plan." Rosalie set the last page down and took her glasses off. She rubbed the bridge of her nose. When she looked at Darius, her face held the controlled expression of a woman managing something considerably stronger than what she was showing. "She didn't just leave you," Rosalie said. Her voice was even, quiet. "She was building a door to walk through and using your money to build it." Nobody spoke for a moment. "What she doesn't know," Darius said, "is that I know, and it needs to stay that way." Rosalie pointed at him. "You don't change a single thing. You act the same. You speak the same. You do not touch one joint account. You do not move $1 until we have the full picture and counsel tells us we're ready. Understood. Victor gathered the copied documents into a neat stack and slid them into the folder he'd brought. He stood, pushed his chair in. I'll call Reeves at 7. He shook Darius's hand, firm, brief, and let himself out the front door. Rosalie stayed. She poured herself a glass of water and sat back down at the table. At 11:42, headlights swept across the kitchen wall. Camille's car. Darius stood. I'm going to bed. Rosalie looked at him. Go. He climbed the stairs in the dark and lay down on top of the covers, still dressed. He heard the front door open below, heard Camille's heels on the hardwood, then on the stairs. He closed his eyes, regulated his breathing, slow, deep, the rhythm of a man asleep. She came in, moved through the dark, changed her clothes without turning on a light. She slid into bed beside him, careful and quiet, believing the performance had worked, believing he'd been broken down enough to manage. He kept his eyes closed and his breathing steady. Don't you touch a single joint account, Rosalie had said from the kitchen below, just before he came upstairs. Until I say so. He had no intention of touching anything. Camille left at 9:15. She was dressed well, hair done. A light perfume that Darius recognized as the one she wore when she wanted to make an impression. She kissed him on the cheek on her way through the kitchen. Quick, practiced, the kind of kiss that is more habit than feeling, and said she was meeting a girlfriend for brunch downtown. Have fun, Darius said. She grabbed her keys off the counter and walked out. He stood at the kitchen window and watched her back out of the driveway. He watched the car until it turned the corner and disappeared. Victor was already at the table with his laptop open. Rosalie was pouring coffee. The documents were spread out again. Same order as last night. Precise. Nothing shifted. At 9:30, Victor turned the laptop to face the table. Paul Reeves appeared on the screen. He was a trim, light-skinned man in his mid-50s, with round glasses and the unhurried manner of someone who had delivered difficult information so many times that he'd found a way to do it cleanly. He had a second monitor off to the side, a yellow legal pad in front of him with handwritten notes already covering the first 2 pages. Mr. Webb, he said, I've had a few hours with the documentation Victor sent over. I want to walk you through what I'm seeing. Go ahead, Darius said. Reeves clicked something on his end and held a printed spreadsheet up to the camera. The transfers begin 22 months ago. Small at first. 800 here, 1,200 there. Coded in your joint account records as home improvement expenses, contractor payments, material costs, that kind of language. He set the sheet down. They get larger over time. More confident. By month 8, she's moving between $3,000 and $5,000 in a single transfer. The LLC, Webb Hale Properties, is the receiving account every time. Rosalie was writing. Her pen moved without pause. Total? Victor asked. Confirmed transfers across the full 22 months. 47,300 and change. Reeves said it without inflection. But I want to flag one specific item. He held up a second sheet, a single invoice, enlarged on the page. This one was filed in the LLC's expense records as a contractor payment for pergola construction. The invoice is made out to a company called Reliable Home Solutions. $14,000. He paused. I ran the business registration on Reliable Home Solutions. It was incorporated 4 months ago. Single registered agent. No employees on record. No license with the city contractor board. The kitchen was very quiet. It's a shell, Rosalie said. She wasn't asking. That's the cleanest word for it, Reeves said. The money moved through it and landed back in the LLC's operating account. The pergola invoice appears to be fabricated. Darius looked at the table. He thought about last Saturday morning, the measuring tape, the lumber he'd cut by hand. the satisfaction of building something straight and level. He had built that pergola himself, with his own tools, in his own backyard. Across 40 hours of weekend mornings, there was a $14,000 invoice for it in his wife's fraudulent company's books. He breathed. He kept his hands flat on the table. "Is it actionable?" Victor asked. "More than actionable," Reeves said. "The fabricated invoices alone constitute wire fraud. The pattern of transfers, combined with the LLC structure and the co-ownership with Preston Hale, creates a picture of coordinated financial concealment. In a divorce proceeding, this is devastating, both for asset division and for any argument she makes about equitable claim. If the DA's office looked at it, they would have the basis for criminal charges." Rosalie set her pen down. She looked at Darius. "Baby," she said. Her voice was low and even. "She didn't just leave you." She paused. "She robbed you on the way out." The words landed. He let them land. He didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't look away from the table. He sat with it for 3 full seconds. The full weight of it. The pergola. The $47,000. The 14 months of messages. The men on his lawn. And then he lifted his eyes. "Mr. Reeves," he said, "I need a complete forensic report. Every transfer, every invoice, every receiving account. Sourced and documented. I can have a preliminary report in 5 business days," Reeves said. "Full report within 2 weeks. 5 days for the preliminary. That's fine. I'll need formal engagement paperwork. Victor will handle it today." Reeves nodded. "Yes, sir." Victor closed the laptop. That afternoon, while Rosalie reorganized the documents by date and Victor made calls in the living room, Darius sat at his desk in the back bedroom and logged into his employer's HR portal. He updated his direct deposit. New account number. New bank. Personal account, his name only, opened 6 months ago when he refinanced a tool loan. A quiet, boring account that Camille had never known existed. He confirmed the change. Logged out. Camille came home at 2. She dropped her bag by the door, kicked off her shoes, and walked into the kitchen where Darius was standing at the counter, making a sandwich. "How was brunch?" he asked. "Good." She opened the refrigerator. "We went to that new place on Meridian. How was it?" "Decent. A little overpriced." She poured herself a glass of water. He handed her half the sandwich without being asked. She took it. He watched nothing on her face. She watched nothing on his. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon. Darius was at his desk at the engineering firm, reviewing load calculations on a drainage project, when his phone buzzed. He picked it up without hurrying. "Found something," Victor said. No greeting. He never wasted the front end of a conversation. Talk. Preston Hale has a wife. Legal wife. Marriage was never dissolved. The divorce filing stalled out in 2021 and neither party pushed it to completion. A pause. Her name is Deborah. She's been watching him for a while. Turns out she's been doing her own homework. Darius set his pencil down. How much homework? Enough that when I reached out to her through my contact, she asked me one question. What question? She asked if the person she'd be meeting had standing to act on what she had. I told her yes. Victor paused again. She said she'd been waiting for that. The diner was on the east side of the city, on a stretch of road that still had an auto parts store and a laundromat and a church with a hand-painted marquee, the kind of block that hadn't been redeveloped yet. The parking lot was half full. Inside, it smelled like coffee and bacon grease and something sweet from the pie case near the register. Deborah Hale was already seated when Darius arrived. She had a booth near the back wall, away from the windows. She had chosen it deliberately. He could tell by the way she sat facing the door, her back straight, both hands on the table. A manila folder sat to her right. A cup of coffee sat in front of her, already half empty. She had been here a while. She was a trim woman with natural hair pulled back and eyes that moved to him the moment he cleared the entrance. She didn't wave, didn't smile. She just watched him cross the diner and waited. He slid into the seat across from her. She looked at him the way people look at someone they've already made a decision about, assessing whether the reality matches what they expected. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy her. Before Darius opened his mouth, she slid the folder across the table. He looked at her. "Start there," she said. "Then we can talk." He opened it. The first few pages were bank statements, Preston's business accounts, highlighted in yellow at specific line items. Wire transfers, all routed through the same 3 city-funded development projects. The amounts were significant. The destinations were not the vendors listed in the project filings. Someone had taken the time to trace where the money actually went and had written the receiving account names in the margins by hand, in small, clean print. Behind the bank statements were 3 affidavits, each one signed and notarized, each one from a former employee, 2 project managers, and a site supervisor. The language was straightforward, the kind of language people use when they have stopped being afraid. Funds were redirected at Mr. Cito. Hale's instruction. We were told the vendors had been paid. They had not been paid. One of the affidavits had a line that Darius read twice. I was asked to sign off on invoices I knew were not legitimate. When I raised the issue, I was removed from the project 2 weeks later. 3 projects, all financed through the city's Community Reinvestment Loan Program. All 3 carrying irregularities that added up to something far more serious than sloppy bookkeeping. Then he reached the photograph. It was a standard printout, the kind of image captured by a security camera or a phone, cropped and sharpened. A title company office. The kind of place with a small conference table and a lot of paperwork. The timestamp in the corner read 8 months ago. Preston stood on the left side of the table, signing. He was dressed the way Preston was always dressed. Sharp, confident, performing. Camille stood across from him, her own pen in hand, her signature going down on a second set of documents. They were not looking at each other. They were looking at the papers, businesslike, practiced. Darius did not recognize the property address on the visible document cover. He had never seen it before. He had never been told about it. He closed the folder. He set it flat on the table and left his hand on top of it. "How long have you been collecting this?" he asked. "The affidavits, about 4 months. The financial records go back further." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "I knew I was going to need it. I just didn't know who I was going to need it with." "Why not file it yourself?" "Because a bitter, estranged wife filing a complaint against her husband looks like exactly what it is." Her voice was flat, not cold, just honest in the way people are honest when they have run out of patience for pretense. But a pattern of fraud, documented and submitted alongside a separate civil case with its own forensic backing, that's different. That goes somewhere. Darius looked at the folder. 8 months ago. He had been paying the mortgage on their home, alone, for 6 of those months. Camille had told him the joint account withdrawals were covering household expenses. He had believed her. Preston had purchased a property and put Camille's name on the title. He had been financing his own replacement. The realization didn't arrive loudly. It arrived the way structural damage arrives, quietly, from the inside, in a place that had looked solid from the outside for a long time. He picked up the folder. "Thank you," he said. Deborah nodded once. "Don't waste it." He drove home in silence. The folder sat on the passenger seat. The city moved past the windows, traffic lights, strip malls, other people's ordinary Wednesday afternoons. He had everything he needed now. The attorney's name was Sandra Okafor. She worked out of a narrow office on the 4th floor of a building downtown, the kind of office where the bookshelves were overloaded and the desk was buried under organized stacks of paper. She had been recommended by Aunt Rosalie, who described her as someone who did not lose. Darius arrived at 9 in the morning with a copy of Paul Reeves's completed forensic report, Deborah's folder, and a thumb drive containing every photograph he had taken over the past 2 weeks. He set them on her desk in a neat row. She spent 40 minutes reviewing without speaking. He sat across from her and waited. When she looked up, she said, "You came prepared." "I usually do," he said. She set down the forensic report. 2 tracks. Civil fraud first. The LLC transfers, the fraudulent invoices, the property title. Divorce runs parallel. We file both on the same day, so there's no opportunity to move assets between the two. That's what I want. I'll need 2 weeks to structure it properly. She tapped the corner of Reeves's report with one finger. "This is solid. Your forensic accountant is thorough. He was recommended by someone I trust." She nodded. "Go home. Act normal. Don't touch anything she might notice." He stood and shook her hand. "I'll be ready," he said. He spent the next several days moving quietly through every room of the house. He photographed the furniture, the sectional in the living room, the dining table they bought together 3 years ago, the artwork Camille had selected and hung herself. He photographed the appliances, the electronics, the contents of the safe in the bedroom closet. He had everything appraised by a service that did estate evaluations, scheduling it for a morning when Camille was at work. He changed the beneficiary on his life insurance policy. He updated his pension documentation through the firm's HR portal during his lunch break, sitting in his car in the parking garage with his phone. He did all of it without urgency, without heat. Each step was simply the next thing that needed to be done. He approached it the same way he had approached every task since he was 18 years old. Identify what the situation requires, determine the correct sequence, execute without deviation. Victor called on a Thursday evening. "Deborah's ready to file," he said. "She's going in as a legal business partner. She still has standing in the marriage, which gives her standing in the business. The compliance audit goes in under her name." "When?" "Friday morning. The planning office contact submits it the same day." Darius was standing on the back porch. The unfinished pergola frame cast long shadows across the yard in the evening light. "Do it." Victor paused. "Once that audit lands, his project disbursements freeze. His investors are going to start calling within days." "I know. He's going to know something's moving." "Yes," Darius said. "He will." The audit was submitted Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, the city had suspended disbursements on all 3 of Preston's community reinvestment projects pending review. Darius knew this because Victor called him at 4:17 with 3 words, "Clock is running." Darius was in a hardware store when the call came, picking up weatherproofing stain for the pergola wood. He thanked Victor and paid for the stain and drove home. That weekend, he worked on the pergola. He measured. He cut. He stained the new cross beams a warm cedar brown and let them dry in the afternoon sun. Camille came out once, looked at the progress, said it was looking good. He thanked her. She went back inside. He first saw Preston at the bank that Monday. Darius was depositing a check from the engineering firm's expense reimbursement. Nothing significant. Routine. When he noticed Preston at the counter down the row. Preston was dressed the way he always dressed. Sharp jacket. Good shoes. He was laughing at something the teller said. He looked entirely comfortable. Entirely unbothered. He saw Darius. For a half-second, something moved across his face. Not quite uncertainty. More like the recalibration of a man deciding which posture to adopt. Then he settled on a slow smile and a small lift of the chin. The gesture of a man who believed the game was already decided. Darius looked at him without expression. He finished his transaction, folded his receipt, and left. 3 days later, he saw Preston's car parked outside Caruso's, the Italian place on Meridian that he and Camille had eaten at for years, the one they went to on their anniversary. Preston and Camille were visible through the window, seated at a table near the front. Camille was laughing. Darius drove past without slowing down. He noted it, filed it, added it to the picture of a man who believed he had already won, who was now making the rounds of the places that used to belong to someone else. Preston wasn't being careless by accident. He was being careless because he genuinely believed the outcome was settled. That belief was going to cost him everything. On Saturday night, Darius sent Camille a text. Sunday evening, kitchen. We need to talk. She replied 20 minutes later. Of course. Everything okay? He set the phone face down on the table. He scheduled the conversation for 6 o'clock. The kitchen smelled like the rosemary chicken Darius had made for dinner. He had cooked it deliberately, set the table, lit the candle on the counter, made everything look like a regular Sunday. He wanted her comfortable. He wanted her to believe she was walking into a room she controlled. Camille sat down across from him at 6 o'clock exactly. She had changed into a soft blue blouse. Her hair was done. She had prepared herself, not for a fight, but for a performance. He could see it in the way she folded her hands on the table, the way she arranged her face into something that looked like sadness, but wasn't. She had practiced this. Darius sat with his hands flat on the table and said, "Go ahead." She blinked. A small flicker of surprise. She had expected to ease into it, maybe wait for him to open the door. But she recovered quickly. That was one thing about Camille. She was quick. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she began. Her voice was soft, measured. "About us, about where we are. I don't think either of us has been happy for a long time, Darius, and I think we both know that." He said nothing. "I don't want to hurt you." "That's the last thing I want." She let that sit for a moment. "But I think we've grown in different directions. I need more than... I need something different. Something that fits who I am now." Still, he said nothing. She kept going. She talked about connection, about feeling unseen, about wanting a life that matched her ambitions. She spoke carefully, choosing every word the way a person chooses footing on unfamiliar ground, testing each step before committing weight to it. She never said Preston's name. She never said the word affair. She gave him a version of the story where no one had done anything wrong, where this was simply two people who had drifted, and she was simply the one honest enough to say so. When she finally stopped, the kitchen was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator. She looked at him with an expression built to look like sincerity. "I hope we can do this with respect, for everything we've been to each other." Darius looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached down beside his chair and brought up the folder. He set it on the table between them and opened it without a word. "Webb Hale Properties," he said. "LLC. Filed 18 months ago. Your name, Preston Hale's name." He turned the page. "Joint account transfers. 22 separate transactions over 23 months. Categorized as home improvement expenses." He slid the page toward her. "This one here, $14,000. Labeled as contractor fees for the pergola in the backyard. The pergola I built with my own hands." Camille's expression had stopped moving. He turned another page. "The property on Caldwell Street. Purchased 8 months ago. Titled in your name." Preston signed the documents. "I have the photograph from the title company." He placed it in front of her, her own face looking up from a conference table beside Preston's. "I was paying this mortgage alone for 6 months, while you held title to another house." "Darius!" "I'm not finished." He turned another page. The tablet screenshots. Every message. He didn't read them aloud. He just turned the pages and let her see them. 14 months, he said. "The last one sent the morning those men showed up in my yard. It's done. He won't cause problems after today." He looked up at her. The softness was completely gone from her face. What replaced it was something colder and more honest than anything he had seen from her in years. "Where did you get—" "You left the tablet open," he said. "On the counter." Her jaw tightened. "You can't prove intent," she said. "The transfers could be disputed. Accounting errors, misclassifications. You can't prove I meant to—" "Paul Reeves can." Darius said the name without emphasis, the same way he said everything. Forensic accountant, 30-page report, documented transfer pattern, fabricated invoice trail, LLC co-ownership confirmed. He paused. I've already had a preliminary conversation with the DA's office. Her face went still. You have two options, he said. The first is a negotiated settlement. Every dollar transferred into Webb Hale Properties comes back. The property on Caldwell gets folded into the divorce judgment. We do this quietly, through attorneys, and it stays out of the public record. He let her hold that for a moment. The second option is court. Full proceedings. The forensic report enters evidence. The LLC filings become public record. Preston's name is on every document. The DA's preliminary interest becomes formal. Everything is visible to anyone who looks. Camille was very still now. She was doing what she always did, calculating, measuring the distance between where she stood and where the exits were. Is there any version of this, she said quietly, where you don't take it all the way? He thought about the men on his lawn, about the text message on the tablet, about a $14,000 invoice on work he had done with his own hands, about 7 years, about what loyalty costs and what it had cost him. No, he said. There isn't. He closed the folder and stood up. The audit results dropped on a Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, the city's Office of Community Development had posted a formal notice on its website. 3 active development projects under Preston Hale's firm, Hale Development Group, were suspended pending a compliance investigation into the use of public reinvestment funds. The language was dry, official. It read the way government documents always read, flat, bloodless, like a weather report. But the numbers behind it were not dry at all. Deborah had filed under her own name as a legal partner with standing in the business. That gave the complaint teeth. The planning office couldn't quietly shelve it, couldn't let it sit in a drawer somewhere until it became someone else's problem. They had to move, and they did. The local business journal ran the item that Thursday. It was 4 paragraphs, no photograph. Tucked below the fold on the real estate page, between a piece on warehouse conversions and an advertisement for a title company. 4 paragraphs. Darius read it once at his kitchen table, over coffee, before work. 4 paragraphs was enough. By Friday, 2 of Preston's financing partners had called. By the following Monday, both had pulled out. Their letters cited the audit, cited the suspension, cited the uncertainty of the timeline. The language was professional and careful, but the meaning was simple. They were not going to go down with the ship. The third partner filed suit the following week. Then a fourth, a smaller one, filed separately. The suits alleged misrepresentation, that Preston had not disclosed the compliance risk when securing their capital. The claims had merit. Paul Reeves, reviewing the filings on Victor's request, said as much in a brief email. These will not go away. Preston's primary office building, a 4-story brick property on Merchant Street that he had owned for 11 years, the kind of asset a man keeps because it means something, went to market inside of 3 weeks. The listing price told the story. It was not the price of a man conducting an orderly business decision. It was the price of a man who needed cash, and needed it soon. The city council session was on a Thursday evening. The chamber was a low-ceilinged room with fluorescent lighting and rows of padded chairs that had been slightly too small for 20 years. The agenda was posted on the door. Item 7. Remarks from Preston Hale, Hale Development Group, regarding a proposed mixed-use development on the city's East Corridor. He couldn't cancel. Darius had understood that from the moment he saw Preston's name on the agenda. Canceling would be an admission. It would signal to the council, to the room, to every person who had read those 4 paragraphs in the business journal that there was something to run from. Preston had spent his entire career building the image of a man who didn't run. He was trapped by it now. Darius arrived early. He sat in the 3rd row. center. He wore a dark jacket and kept his hands loose in his lap. He brought nothing with him. No folder, no phone on the table, no notebook. He didn't need anything. He just needed to be there. Preston walked in at 7 minutes past the hour. He was dressed the way he always dressed. Expensive jacket, pocket square, shoes that caught the light. He had done everything right with his appearance. Everything that could be controlled on the outside had been controlled. But when he scanned the room and his eyes landed on Darius, something moved across his face. It was brief. A flicker. The same flicker Darius had seen on men in far more dangerous rooms. The flicker of a person who has just realized that the ground they were standing on is not as solid as it looked. Preston looked away, approached the podium, began his remarks. He was halfway through his second paragraph when he lost his place the first time. He stopped, looked down at his notes, found it again, and pushed forward. His voice was slightly faster than it should have been, the rhythm of a man compensating. 2 of the council members exchanged a glance. The second stumble came near the end, when he tried to pivot to projected revenue figures and cited the wrong year. Someone in the room coughed. Preston corrected himself. His jaw was tight. His hand, gripping the edge of the podium, had gone pale at the knuckle. When he finished, the applause was polite and brief. Darius waited in the lobby. He stood near the far wall, hands at his sides, watching the foot traffic from the chamber thin out. Council members, staff, a few developers who had shown up for the agenda items that followed. Preston came through the doors and stopped when he saw him. For a moment, neither man moved. Then Preston crossed the lobby. The pocket square was still perfect. The shoes still caught the light. But the performance was gone, stripped down to something smaller, something tired, like a set after the audience has left. He stopped a few feet away and looked at Darius. "What do you want?" he said. His voice was quiet, lower than it had ever been in Darius's yard, standing in front of 20 men with his arms spread wide. Darius looked at him, the same steady, measuring look he had used on the circle, the same look he had used in darker places than this lobby, on far more dangerous men than this one. "I already have it," Darius said. He turned and walked through the lobby doors without looking back. The sun came up slow that morning. It crept over the back fence in long, flat strips, moving across the yard the way light does in early fall. Quiet, unhurried, like it had nowhere particular to be. The grass was still damp. The air smelled like oak and cut wood, and the faint edge of coming cold. Darius stood on the back deck with his coffee and looked at what he'd built. The pergola was finished. Had been finished for almost a year now. Cedar posts, properly set. Crossbeams measured and cut clean. The whole structure level and square in a way that only someone who had stood under crooked work long enough could fully appreciate. He'd done it differently the second time around. Tighter spacing on the rafters, a slight pitch to shed rainwater, a stain that let the grain show through instead of covering it. Better than the original design. Better in every way that mattered. He took a sip of coffee and let the quiet settle around him. The civil settlement had been signed 4 months after that Sunday evening at the kitchen table. Every dollar Camille had moved out of their joint accounts came back. Every fraudulent transfer that Paul Reeves had documented in his forensic report was accounted for in the judgment. The fabricated contractor invoices, the redirected savings, the 14 months of quiet extraction. All of it returned. His attorney had structured it without mercy and executed it without noise. The number at the bottom of the settlement document was precise. It was the right number. Darius knew because he had checked it against Reeves's report himself, line by line, the same way he checked load calculations at work. Not because he didn't trust the process, but because he was the kind of man who checked. The divorce finalized in 90 days. Camille kept her clothes, her car, and her personal belongings. She left on a Wednesday, while Darius was at work. He came home to a house that was slightly emptier in certain rooms and completely unchanged in the ones that had always mattered. The filing cabinets were still organized. The kitchen still worked. The foundation was still solid. The house remained his. The property Preston had purchased in Camille's name, the one Darius had found in Deborah's folder, the one he had been unknowingly financing with every mortgage payment he'd made alone, had been frozen during the fraud proceedings. When the settlement was signed and his recovered equity was extracted, it was released. Preston and Camille moved into it. It was smaller than the life Camille had been building toward in her head for 2 years. Smaller than the pictures she had assembled in whatever private place she kept such pictures. Darius knew this the way he knew most things, without needing to be told directly, without needing to look. He didn't look. He'd converted the garage the following spring. It took him 6 weekends. He ran the electrical himself, consulted an inspector twice, and framed out a small unit with a separate entrance off the side fence. He rented it out in June to a graduate student who paid on time and kept to herself. The rental income went directly to a separate account, not for anything specific, just building something, the way he always built things, one layer at a time, with no hurry about it. The promotion at the engineering firm came in the summer. Project lead on a municipal drainage contract, the kind of work that took patience and precision, and the ability to see a problem from the ground up. His manager said it in the plainest terms possible. "You're the right person for this." Darius thanked him, shook his hand, and went back to his desk. He took a week in August. Last year it had been the Smoky Mountains. Rented a small cabin, brought books he actually read, woke up without an alarm. This year he was thinking the coast, somewhere with salt air and enough distance from everything that the silence felt chosen rather than empty. Aunt Rosalie had people over for dinner every few months. Nothing formal. No occasion required. She cooked enough for 8, even when there were 4. And she sat at the head of her table like the woman who had always been at the head of that table. Reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, saying grace in the same tone she used for everything else, matter of fact, and meaning every word of it. Victor came when his schedule allowed. He and Darius ate and talked about work, about nothing, about things that had nothing to do with any of it. Nobody raised a glass and made a speech. Nobody named what had happened or described how it ended, or gave it a shape that required acknowledgement. They just ate. That was the right way to do it. Darius had known that without having to figure it out. Preston Hale's compliance record was public and permanent. It lived in city databases and business registries the way all public records lived, quietly, available to anyone who thought to look. No public financing body in the region would touch a Hale development project now. The investors who had sued settled. The Merchant Street building was gone. He was still working, technically. Smaller deals, private money, where it could be found. The shoes probably still caught the light. Darius didn't think about it much. He set his coffee cup down on the rail. He placed both hands flat on the top beam of the pergola, solid under his palms, not a fraction of give in either direction. Level, square, built exactly the way it should have been built the first time, and better. He had built it right the second time. He built everything right the second time. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.